Back to another episode of WJ Live. I'm George Upper, editor-in-chief of the Western Journal, and I'm here with Joey Chester, assignment editor, as well as making his first appearance as an actual employee of the Western Journal, Grant Atkinson, our newly minted reporter. He was unemployed over the weekend.
I was. Collected benefits.
Has come back. No longer as a lowly intern, but now a lowly reporter. He's still lowly. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about the apparent disconnect between events in Afghanistan, as well as the Biden administration's responses, and an update on the officer who shot U.S. Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt during the Capitol incursion on January 6th. Before we get to that, let me remind you to click that subscribe button and the bell next to it. Make sure you are always notified when you get a new episode of WJ Live ready to be watched. You don't want to miss any of them. It's the truth from people you trust. We're going to do that for you best we can every day. Well, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday when we're here on WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. So starting the show off today, here's the reality in Afghanistan. Let's start with this. According to a story the Western Journal ran over the weekend, even experienced soldiers and journalists on the ground in Afghanistan are painting a bleak picture of the situation there. Stuart Ramsey, a reporter for Sky News, has covered 18 wars over 30 years. He's currently in Afghanistan as chief correspondent for Sky News, and on Saturday he described the state of affairs there around Kabul airport as utterly horrendous. We have some video of a report Ramsey filed that describes what he's been seeing on the ground there in Kabul and what he's hearing from soldiers deployed on the ground. Let's take a look at that.
This is the worst day by far. We've just come from the outside back into the camp. We've been there for a few hours. It is utterly horrendous. It is boiling hot. People have been queuing in their thousands, and they're now coming down the road, or they're down the road, to containers, big cargo containers that are designed to funnel the people down to the right-hand side and mainly down the left-hand side. But people at the front are being absolutely crushed, and we believe people have died this morning. I've seen a lot of people getting medical attention. The shout for medics and for stretchers is almost continuous. At the same time, there's blast explosions which are designed to frighten the crowd, to try to get them to push back, firing in the air, trying to get people just to take a step back. There's children being pulled out up over the sea cargo carriers and brought down, where medics are trying to treat them as well. It is utterly horrendous. A number of the soldiers I've spoken to, I mean, they're not in panic. That is completely the wrong description. It is very tense. They're doing everything to try to keep some order, but also to rescue people who are in danger of dying, or who may well be dying. We believe they are. A number of the senior soldiers that I've spoken to say that these are people who have done multiple tours of Afghanistan, saying it is the worst thing they have ever seen in their entire careers in the military. Now, this is not to be taken lightly, because we are talking hardened combat soldiers.
Obviously, the situation there is very tense. Later in that report, Ramsey said he saw no end in sight. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden spoke with reporters. That report was from Saturday. Biden spoke with reporters at the White House on Sunday and continued to double down on his position regarding Afghanistan. Quote, "History is going to record this was the logical, rational, and right decision to make. When this is over, the American people will have a clear understanding of what I did and why we did it," which will be nice because we certainly don't have one now. In reality, very few people are arguing that the decision to get out of Afghanistan was a bad one. Americans are split on that issue. Majority support ending that war in one way or the other, but it's the way the Biden administration is bungling the withdrawal that has people in both parties questioning his competence at this point. Also in recent days, public opinion polls have showed Biden's approval rating slipping to its lowest point since January. And a CBS News YouGov poll taken August 18 through 20, so last week, before the weekend, found 63% of adults support removing U.S. troops, but just 47% approve of how Biden has managed the withdrawal. 74% of respondents, including 62% of Democrats, said the way the United States has removed troops has gone badly. 62% of Democrats said that. That's gotta hurt. But forget about the polling. I'm far more concerned, as I'm sure you are, with the events on the ground than with what American voters think about events on the ground. And so should Biden be. But it doesn't appear that he is. In fact, it's increasingly looking like Joe Biden isn't even fully aware of events on the ground. And I can see three possible explanations for that. Number one, Joe Biden is lying to the American people in hopes that this will all go away before anyone catches on. I talked about that on last Friday's episode of WJ Live. You can take a look at that after today's show. Number two, Joe Biden has been told about the situation in Afghanistan, but it is simply in denial, or maybe what he's being told simply isn't registering with him. So this would maybe go to the idea of some cognitive issues that some people think President Biden has. Number three, Joe Biden isn't being told the truth himself about what's happening in Afghanistan by his own key advisors. None of those is a happy situation for the American people. Gentlemen, what do you think explains the gap between Biden's public statements about Afghanistan and what's really happening there on the ground in Kabul? Joey, let's start with you.
If I had to guess, it would be that Biden is just not being told what's going on, which is very problematic. I mean, the guy is the commander in chief. He should be told of the situation, but I don't think he's being told, and that's a problem. Otherwise, if he does know, he's lying to the American people. And I mean, in a way, I guess he's still lying to us because he's simply not telling the truth about what's happening in Afghanistan. And we deserve to know. I'm angry at what he's saying. I'm incredibly angry because you could put a side-by-side video of Joe Biden talking compared to the actual events in Kabul that directly contradict what he's saying. So I think he's just not being told. I think that maybe he couldn't cognitively handle or process this. I don't know, because you'd have to be a pretty bad human being to hide this information from the American people, to lie to the American people.
Grant, what do you think?
Yeah, I tend to not go so much towards the lying route. There probably is a little bit of lying going on, so much as any politician lies to try to make themselves look good in front of the American public. But I think the second two things that you said, almost a combination of those, are where I kind of tend to land. I think that Joe Biden has had a history of being in denial. Anytime we've seen, really throughout his career, but especially since his campaign, his presidency, when something gets brought up that he doesn't like, he gets very defensive, he gets angry. We saw in the campaign, somebody asked him a question he didn't like, he started calling him fat. Yeah. I mean, we've seen like many times that's kind of a pattern from Biden. So I think denial is something that's part of who he is, but I also think that there are certain things, like Joey said, that he's not being told. It just seems like there's times when it seems like he's denying something, and then there's times when he just says something that's so false that you're like, he has to just not know what he's talking about, because nobody, if he's going to lie to make himself look better, he would at least do so in a way that's believable. But some things that he said, like in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, in his press briefing on last Friday, some things are just so utterly false that it just has to be that he doesn't know what's happening, because I just don't think anyone would lie that blatantly in front of everyone when the facts are so clear that he's not telling the truth.
So Biden's polling problem isn't limited to Afghanistan. Approval of his pandemic response, which stood at 69% in April, is now down to 53%.
Wow.
On the economy, he's gone from 52 down to 47. Is this a case of his poor performance bleeding into other policy areas? So Americans now seeing Biden through the lens of Afghanistan whenever they look at him? Or is this more indicative of other policy areas in which Biden is failing? Grant, what do you think?
To me, I think that it's not as much that Biden's Afghanistan debacle is really bleeding into other areas. I think it's more like it was a wake-up call, almost like an alarm clock. I think we've seen, as conservatives, we have covered extensively all the problems with the Biden administration. I think that this was a wake-up call, partially for the mainstream media and partially for the American people, because there's really no way that they can deny the severity of this situation and how poorly it's been handled. Like you said, regardless of whether you believe we should have been in Afghanistan or not, we should have pulled out. I think that almost everyone agrees the way that it was executed is just so poorly done. And I think it almost, more than trickling down into his policies, it's almost just a wake-up call to people to say, I wonder what other areas Biden has been incompetent in, and it's just more noticeable now.
So I wonder if there's an element of the mainstream media who clearly have propped up Joe Biden for years now. I wonder if it's if they're getting to the point where they're just like, we look like idiots now if we stop if we continue to not cover his failings. Joey, what do you think is going on with Joe Biden and his polling?
I think the mainstream media has a lot to do with it. I mean, they've repeatedly fact-checked and said, inflation, that's not because of Joe Biden. High gas prices, that's not because of Biden.
Because of Biden, it's a good thing.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Inflation has silver linings.
Right,
Yeah,
yes, higher wages, apparently. So they have tried to cover for all of his failures so far until now. You actually have CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS turning on Joe Biden and reporting the truth about Afghanistan because there's no way to escape the horrifying images from Afghanistan. And I think that's opening people's eyes, kind of like Grant said. So now if you blame Biden for Afghanistan, you start to think, I guess I have been paying more for gas and I have been paying more for meat at the grocery store. And I bet Joe Biden's to blame for that too. And then you think about, it cost me $20 more to put gas in my car this week. That's a problem. So I think people's eyes are opening and they're starting to see the other issues that Joe Biden has created. So, I think that Afghanistan has been a wake-up call to people that I think will continue. I don't think he recovers from this, polling-wise.
Be nice if we saw Joe Biden aware of these issues.
Yes.
I'm not sure he's been awoken to them yet, especially judging by his responses to some of the questions he got this weekend.
It is one of the most, as an American, you want to be able to look up and respect your leaders. I mean, even as conservatives, we want to respect the office of the presidency and at least respect the people who are in that office, the president and vice president. But it's hard when those two people laugh when they are asked very serious questions or talk about very serious topics. Kamala Harris has had a history of doing this since the beginning of her time in office, and Joe Biden joined in over the weekend. I'd like to show you guys a clip of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris both laughing over the weekend at the very serious topic of Afghanistan.
And then a question on the public response. A new poll out today shows Americans wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan, but they disapprove of the way you've handled it. The poll also found that based in part on what's transpired in the last week, the majority of Americans, forgive me, I'm just the messenger, no longer consider you to be competent, focused, or effective in the job.
I haven't seen that poll.
It's up from CBS this morning. What would you say to those Americans who no longer believe that you can do the job?
I had a basic decision to make. I either withdraw America from a 20-year war that, depending on whose analysis you accept, cost us $150 million a day for 20 years or $300 million a day for 20 years.
What's your response to reports of Americans?
Hold on. Slow down, everybody. I want to talk about two things. First, Afghanistan. We couldn't have a higher priority right now, and in particular, our priority is making sure that we safely evacuate American citizens, Afghans who worked with us, Afghans at risk, including women and children, and that is one of our highest, if not the highest priority right now.
I don't like to see our leaders laughing about this very serious subject. What do you guys make of this? Is this like a coping mechanism for them? Is it a way to, make the topic less serious? I mean, what is up with the laughing in response to such a serious issue? Why are they doing it?
Well, they desperately hope to make it a less serious issue. I mean, Biden, the whole communication strategy from the Biden administration is don't talk about the disaster that's going on in there now. You can talk about the disaster of the past 20 years if you want. He talks about $150 million or $300 million a day for 20 years. Okay, great. That's worthy of a conversation. But he will only have that conversation. He will not talk about what's going on today because of the polling numbers that show that the majority of Americans do support the U.S. getting out of Afghanistan. So he wants to keep telling people, yeah, that thing you like, that's what I'm doing. Don't look over here. Don't look at this, where these people's lives are threatened, and they're Americans who probably aren't going to make it out of Afghanistan alive, and it's because I've bungled this whole thing. Don't worry about that over there. Remember when you said you wanted people out of Afghanistan? I'm your man. I'm getting that done. So yeah, that is essentially a positive message, right? That they want to be projecting. So yeah, I think there's, I do always think with both of these two, they just laugh inappropriately because they don't know what else to do. I think it buys them some time as they kind of process the question. But yeah, overall, fundamentally, they don't want to treat this in the serious way that the American people look at it.
Yeah, to me, I think the laughing is sort of a result of kind of a behavior that a lot of the establishment media elites have tolerated for a long time. I think obviously we've seen it with Kamala a lot, not as much with Joe, but we have seen it. When they are asked tough questions, which is not very often because the media doesn't want to ask them tough questions, when they are, this kind of disposition of I'm just going to kind of laugh it off, be like, that's funny that you would ask me that. Like, I was going, and then we never see the media fight back at that. We've seen plenty of times Biden, his famous "come on, man," or whatever it is. We've seen like these mechanisms that they use to avoid answering a difficult question, and we don't see the media come back and say like, "No, I'm serious. Like, can you please answer this question?" They just kind of cower and back down when that happens. I think that kind of attitude has fueled Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be able to say, well, if I get asked a tough question about Afghanistan or I get some bad news about my poll numbers, I'm just going to kind of laugh it off and hope it kind of goes away. I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the last segment of people's eyes are being opened now, and they're going to be much less likely to just let somebody laugh it off and say, okay, we'll just forget about it. Like, this situation is serious, and it's kind of, to me, it's kind of becoming a reckoning for the Biden administration of like, this is not something that you can just giggle away. It's something that you're going to have to address. And I think we're seeing that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, George.
Well, what I just wanted to add, I don't know who asked that first question of Biden, but what was the, don't shoot me, I'm just the messenger.
Yeah, he's like apologizing for it.
Can you imagine them saying that to Trump? They would never say that
I'm
to
sorry.
Donald Trump. I'm sorry to bring you bad news.
They would be like, we have some great news. You have terrible poll numbers. Can you respond to that, please?
Yeah.
I mean,
the Americans hate you.
Yeah. What do you say to the Americans who hate you, which is most of them, Trump?
Yeah.
Just the difference between the way the White House press corps treats Biden versus Trump, it's just so blatantly, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's so, George, this is actually a great opportunity for your usual segment. So the Biden administration, so many people in the administration are claiming that the situation in Afghanistan is not as serious as it's being made out to be. Jen Psaki, just before we were in here at a press conference today, said that no Americans are stranded in Afghanistan. No, they're fine.
Yeah, there was a guy on Hannity last night or Friday night, I think, talking about how he's stranded in Afghanistan.
Right. Yes.
Get to the airport.
Yeah. And we have Kamala Harris saying it's not that big of a deal. Biden claiming it's the best withdrawal that could have possibly happened. Could have been any better. He had perfectly executed. And you've had Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin, all these people claiming that this is not a bad situation. So are they dumb? Do they really not know what's going on, or are they simply being dishonest? And I think if they're being dishonest, there should be some major consequences for that. What do you guys think?
I'd go with both in this case. I think they are being dishonest, at least in various points of the administration.
Mm-hmm.
I think some folks know the truth and aren't saying it. Other people don't know the truth. I think both of those are occurring. But I also think they're being dumb in thinking that this is the way to handle this, thinking that this is just going to go away. Yeah. I think they could learn some lessons from Vietnam if they think that's how that's going to work out. It would never. It doesn't matter what other good news you put out there; it's getting swallowed up by Afghanistan right now.
Yeah.
That's the only story anyone is talking about, and if they could whip inflation tomorrow, which they're not going to do, by the way. They're going to make inflation worse for the next 3 years. But even if they did somehow, by some miracle, fix inflation tomorrow, no one would pay any attention to it, at least not while there's still a single American left in Afghanistan. I'm waiting for the counter. I'm waiting for when you guys are too young to remember this, but during the Iran hostage situation, every news report, literally every news report's down in the bottom. They'd have a little thing on the lower third there that said, day 316 of the hostage crisis or whatever. Yeah. And it was there every day reminding Americans of the issue. And I'm just waiting for that. Here's how many Americans are left in Afghanistan counter to show up on CNN and just stay there every day. And it'll go down and it'll go down and it'll never get to zero because they'll never account for every American who is in Afghanistan. And I guarantee you that they will never account for every every American citizen in Afghanistan today.
Grant, what do you think? Dumb or dishonest?
I tend to lean towards dumb for most of the administration, at least, particularly Biden. I think he, for the most part, doesn't know what's going on. I think he's very confused. I think he is just unaware of how serious the situation is, and I think it's partly because he's not being told. It's partly because he's in denial, all those things that we've talked about. But I think for the most part, it's less lies from him and more him just being dumb. Other people, particularly like Lloyd Austin and things like that, I think those are the kind of people who do know what's going on and they're being dishonest about it. So people like him, I would lean towards dishonest just because that he has all the information and he's not presenting it in a way that's truthful. So I would say to him, dishonest. For people like Biden and even probably Harris for the most part, I would lean more towards dumb.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that Afghanistan has just dominated the news. It's going to continue to dominate the news. I don't think they'll get everyone out by the August 31st deadline. I just don't see it being possible.
Even Biden has started making little murmurs that, maybe a troop presence is going to be required after the 31st. Taliban does not like that idea, but who cares?
Yeah. Surprisingly, there are other things occurring in the news. If you didn't know, Afghanistan seems to be everywhere. One really crazy thing happened today that has not gotten a lot of news coverage, and I think it's really important that we talk about it because it's big. Grant, do you have more on that?
Yes, so a lot of people probably remember Ashley Babbitt. She is the woman who was shot unarmed in the Capitol on January 6th during the incursion there that occurred. They have been very hesitant to release a lot of information about this, obviously because it doesn't fit their narrative of everyone at the Capitol was dangerous, they were evil, and they were the perpetrators. When you have someone who was unarmed and who was a victim of a shooting, then all of a sudden it begins to hurt your narrative. We haven't gotten a lot of coverage about that. But today there was a story that did get covered and that they painted in a kind of interesting light that I'm not sure I agree with. But the story is that the officer who shot Ashley Babbitt, whose name we still don't know because they won't release it, has been cleared of any wrongdoing in the shooting, which is interesting because according to a report from Politico, they said, quote, "The department said in a statement that its Office of Professional Responsibility determined the officer's actions were lawful and within department policy. The Capitol Police allows officers to use deadly force only when the officer reasonably believes that action is in the defense of human life, including the officer's own life, or in injury." in the defense of any person in immediate danger of serious physical injury. The Capitol Police declined to identify the officer because of numerous credible and specific threats against the individual as well as family members. So that kind of implies that Ashley Babbitt had to be a threat to someone else's life in order for her killing to be justified. So indirectly, they're saying she was threatening someone's life. She was unarmed. That is a fact. Meanwhile, we've seen a lot of similar, not similar in the way that they happened, but similar in the fact that someone was killed by a police officer, particularly a lot of African Americans that we've seen. And in a lot of cases, those men have been armed. Not all of them, but in a lot of them, particularly Jacob Blake, which actually happened a year ago today, which is sort of interesting that this news is coming out today. He was armed. He had a knife. And in the coverage of that, we have a tweet here that we'll pull up, but we saw things being said such as Jacob Blake had a knife in the car, but was otherwise unarmed. Otherwise unarmed, except for the arm that he had.
The knife that could have killed someone.
So it's just...
They're mostly peaceful protesters, except for the fires.
Exactly. And in that same article from that tweet, they did identify the officer 3 days after he shot Jacob Blake. There was no hesitation to identify him because of any threats to his family or anything like that. That was never a thing that people were really worried about before.
I'm sure BLM threatened him.
That was never mentioned. I'm sure it happened,
Yeah.
but they weren't concerned about that then. They're suddenly concerned about it now. So I guess my question is just the difference of coverage. I understand neither one of these officers that we just talked about was charged, but just the difference in coverage from, we have this man who killed Jacob Blake who is demonized. The media tries to paint it as he is in the wrong. He shot a man who was armed, but really he wasn't armed that much.
Yeah.
And then we have, a white middle-aged woman who was shot at the Capitol, but because she was a Trump supporter, the coverage is that it was justified. And to me, it's just a double standard. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. I'm curious as to how you see it.
Yeah, I have a big problem with them saying that she fit their definition of a threat. I mean, we ran a story, I forget if it was a few weeks ago, a month or two ago, about a group of Congressional Black Caucus members who stormed a federal building and were unlawfully inside a federal building.
Which we got fact-checked for, I believe.
Yeah, but they were unlawfully in the building. They got arrested for it. They were unarmed, but there were some similarities between that and January 6th. Did the Capitol Police see those congresswomen as threats in that building? I would argue, no, they're probably not the biggest threats. But Capitol Police, by their definition that they are using in the Ashley Babbitt case, would have to classify those Congressional Black Caucus members as threats. Would it have been okay for them to shoot them? I'd say no, certainly not. It should not have been okay for them to shoot them. They didn't, but if they had, no, it would have been wrong. So their standards are just way off here, I think.
Yeah, it is really problematic, I think, to play armchair quarterback in the case of a police shooting. There's so many things going on the scene. You just don't know what's all of those factors are, and you have to remember, police officers, law enforcement officers are acting based on their perception of what's going on, right? So, and perceptions aren't always accurate, but it's all we have. It's the only thing we have to work with. I often say perception is reality, not because perception actually is reality, but because for the person who's perceiving, what else are they going to work with? That's all they have to work with. So I think that's always, it's always concerning. So I actually, in some cases, sort of believe that the Capitol Police case is the better example of how this kind of thing should be handled. Police officer's name hasn't been released, so he has not been, or she, not been subject to the same kind of threats that other people have been in similar cases, and the officer is to some degree sort of given the benefit of the doubt. You're the one on the scene making the decision. This is the decision you made. Barring strong evidence to the contrary, that should probably stand. the problem for me is that that's not what we see in all these other cases. It's guilty. You're guilty until proven innocent. If you're a cop who shoots a person on the street, unarmed or armed or whatever the case might be, all of that damage is done in the first hours of the case, becoming known. The coverage is always damning to law enforcement officers involved. BLM and similar organizations jump in to denounce the killing of an unarmed person. They have no idea what they're talking about, none whatsoever. They just jump on it. I think they have this stuff pre-written, and they just, insert the names and go with the narrative. And then, 3 days later, a week later, whatever, more investigation comes out, and, we actually see dash cam video or whatever, and you realize, oh, no, if I were that cop, I would have shot that guy too. Okay, not
But
a
at
big
that
deal.
point, it's too late.
Exactly. And the fact is BLM has trumpeted this from the rooftops, right? And no one is trumpeting this new information. So that, in every case, essentially every case, that officer's life is just hell for maybe forever, and certainly for a significant period of time. Well, they're trying to do the job that we want them to do. We need them there to do. So that's, to me, the big problem, is the disconnect between the two.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I don't so much have an issue with giving officers the benefit of the doubt. I think that's what we should be doing. I think that we should be saying, in every case, that we should assume the officer's perception of the events was that he was in danger, and, we don't want any officers to be killing anyone who doesn't deserve to be killed, obviously, but we should understand that we aren't there. We aren't that officer, and we don't know what it's like. My issue, I think, comes with the fact that only applies here in this case with the Capitol Police. It doesn't apply in other cases.
Don't see it very often,
right.
Unfortunately. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
A problem that I have is it feels like we don't know all the information that we should as the American public. I mean, this happened at the U.S. Capitol. I'm not advocating for what happened. I wouldn't want anyone to do what happened on January 6th. But, why did he perceive her as a threat? Why did he shoot her? Was it on purpose, or was he just aiming and shooting at a group of protesters? I would like some questions answered that I don't think the Capitol Police have done a very good job of answering. And maybe they can't, but I think I just feel in the dark. Maybe he really did act like he was supposed to. I would just like more transparency, more questions answered.
You also never see anybody talk about January 6th as a mostly peaceful event.
That's a great
you never
point.
hear those
Yeah.
words.
Totally was. I mean, we had a few hundred people, I don't remember what the count was, who broke into the Capitol building. But there were tens of thousands of people outside protesting peacefully, dispersed when they were ordered to disperse, etc. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about that as a mostly peaceful process or protest, when in fact it was probably the best exemplar of a mostly peaceful protest that we've seen in the past couple of years. And folks, that's the problem, is discerning the truth from the lies in these kinds of situations. Whether we're talking about Afghanistan or the Capitol incursion, you have a establishment media and an establishment in general, the media is part of it, who has one agenda, one narrative, and they are just going to shove it down your throat because it's the narrative that best suits them. And then there's the truth. And we are dedicated to the truth, whether it fits our narrative or not. We are only going to publish those things that we understand to be true. That's what Western Journal does. That's what WJ Live does. We fight that battle every day, and you can join us in that battle by becoming a member today at westernjournal.com/join. We'll give you 2 months free when you pay for 10, so you're getting a year-long membership for the price of 10 months, and you'll get exclusive content that not everybody else gets. But the real reason to do it, that's nice. That's a nice perk. Another nice perk is we pull most of the ads off the site for you for the, to give you that kind of reading experience. Another nice perk. That's not the best thing. The best thing is that you are siding with the winning side, the side of truth, on the very front lines of this battle between Heartland America and the establishment elites and their allies in the media. So please consider becoming a member today. You can go to westernjournal.com/join, see the pricing there. It's not a lot of money, and your support means the world to us. I cannot overstate how true that is. With that, we will bid you farewell. Until next time, we're here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific, bringing you the truth on WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal as best we know how. We'll see you next time. Stay safe. Welcome back to WJ Live, and I'm joined today by assignment editor Joey Chester, as well as crack reporter Michael Austin.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.